My daughter looked me straight in the eyes and shouted, "You don't belong here anymore." She thought she was throwing me out of my own home until I quietly opened a drawer, pulled out one document, and showed everyone whose name was actually on the house. Stay with me, because what happened next changed every relationship in my family forever. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Please stick with me because every detail matters. My name is Brenna Hale. I'm a 48-year-old widow, and for the last 23 years, I devoted my life to giving my daughter a safe and comfortable home after my husband passed away. I worked overtime, skipped vacations, and made countless sacrifices so every mortgage payment was made on time. Every room in that house carried memories of the life we rebuilt together. For years, I believed my daughter, Nora, and I shared a bond nothing could break. But everything changed after she got engaged to Grant Mercer, the confident son of a wealthy real estate family. Little by little, Nora started acting differently. She criticized the way I dressed, dismissed my opinions, and treated me like I was an inconvenience whenever Grant was around. I convinced myself it was only stress from planning the wedding. I kept making excuses because I couldn't imagine my own daughter would ever turn against me. I had no idea she was about to tell me I no longer belonged in the very home I had spent my life building. After Grant Mercer entered Nora's life, everything changed in ways I never expected. At first, he seemed polite and respectful, but it didn't take long for his true personality to surface. He criticized almost everything about my home. The furniture was outdated, my cooking was too simple, and even the neighborhood where I had raised my daughter was suddenly not good enough. He kept saying they needed a better image before the wedding because people from his family's social circle expected a certain lifestyle. The hardest part wasn't listening to Grant's insults. It was watching Nora agree with him. Instead of defending me, she nodded along and repeated many of the same complaints. The daughter who once appreciated everything I had done slowly started treating me like I was holding her back. Grant even began referring to my house as our future family home, speaking as though ownership had already been decided. I started noticing small but troubling changes. Conversations ended the moment I entered a room. Household bills disappeared from the kitchen counter before I could see them. Contractors visited to discuss renovation ideas that no one had bothered to mention to me. Paint colors, furniture replacements, and remodeling plans were being discussed without my knowledge or permission. Legally, the house belonged only to me, but no one acted like that mattered anymore. I chose not to argue because I wanted to keep the peace before the wedding. I convinced myself they were simply excited about their future together. I didn't realize those quiet decisions were part of a much bigger plan that would soon threaten everything I had worked so hard to build. As the weeks passed, I barely recognized the home I had spent years creating. It wasn't just the changes to the furniture or decorations. It was the feeling that I no longer mattered inside my own walls. Every day, I found another reminder that my opinions had become invisible. One afternoon, I came home from work and discovered someone had measured my bedroom for renovations without asking for my permission. When I questioned it, Grant casually said they were only planning ahead for the future. The family photographs that had filled the walls for years slowly disappeared. Pictures of birthdays, holidays, and my late husband were packed away and replaced with expensive artwork that Nora and Grant had picked out together. The house no longer reflected the memories we had built. It looked like they were already erasing my life from it. Even our relatives began calling it the newlyweds' place, as if ownership had already changed hands. During family dinners, every time I tried to join the conversation, someone interrupted me or quickly changed the subject. I felt like an unwanted guest sitting at my own table. Then Nora suggested something that completely broke my heart. She smiled as though it was perfectly reasonable and said I should move into the small guest room because the master bedroom would be better for her and Grant after the wedding. She acted like it was a simple adjustment instead of asking me to give up the room I had shared with my husband. I wanted to speak up, but I kept convincing myself that arguing would only create more tension. So I stayed quiet, pretending everything was fine while feeling like a stranger in my own home. A few weeks later, Grant announced that he wanted to host an engagement dinner for both families. What surprised me most was that he made all the arrangements without asking if I was comfortable having so many guests in my home. I agreed anyway because I didn't want to create problems before the wedding. I spent the entire day cleaning, cooking, and making sure everything was perfect, hoping the evening would bring our families closer together. Instead, it became one of the most painful nights of my life. As everyone gathered around the dining table, nearly every conversation revolved around Nora and Grant's future. His parents proudly talked about their plans, while my relatives praised the happy couple. I sat there quietly, serving food and refilling drinks, yet it felt as though I had disappeared. Very few people even acknowledged the effort I had put into hosting everyone. Halfway through dinner, Grant lifted his glass with a confident smile and jokingly thanked everyone for letting him take over the property. The room filled with laughter. I forced myself to smile, waiting for someone to remind him that the house wasn't his. No one did. Instead, Nora excitedly started describing the major renovations they planned after the wedding. She spoke about remodeling rooms, replacing furniture, and changing the entire layout as though every decision had already been approved. Not once did either of them ask for my opinion or even mention that the house legally belonged to me. As I looked around the table, I realized something that hurt more than Grant's joke. Everyone genuinely believed I would quietly move aside and hand over the home I had spent decades building. For the first time, I felt like nothing more than a visitor in my own house. The morning after the engagement dinner, I hoped the uncomfortable moments from the night before were behind us. Instead, I woke up to the sound of a large moving truck pulling into my driveway. When I looked outside, several movers were unloading expensive furniture and carrying it toward my front door. I had never ordered any of it, and no one had asked for my permission. I walked outside and calmly asked what was happening. Grant barely looked at me before saying everything had already been arranged. He explained they were replacing the old furniture to give the house a more modern style before the wedding. When I reminded him that this was my home and no changes could be made without my approval, he dismissed my concerns as if they didn't matter. Before I could say another word, Nora suddenly lost her patience. Her face filled with frustration as relatives and the moving crew watched from only a few feet away. Then she shouted words I never imagined hearing from my own daughter. "You don't belong here anymore." The sentence echoed through the house, leaving the entire room silent. I stood completely still, unable to believe what I had just heard. I wasn't angry in that moment. I was devastated. Every sacrifice I had made, every extra shift I had worked, and every dream I had set aside for my daughter flashed through my mind. The little girl I had loved more than anything was now trying to throw me out of the home I had spent decades paying for. Everyone watched, expecting me to argue, cry, or beg to stay. I did none of those things. Without raising my voice, I turned around, walked upstairs, and quietly disappeared into my bedroom, knowing exactly what I needed to do next. I walked into my bedroom without saying a single word. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I opened the bottom drawer of an old wooden dresser and reached for a worn blue folder I had carefully protected for years. It wasn't filled with sentimental keepsakes or family photographs. It contained every important document connected to my home. After taking a deep breath, I carried it downstairs where everyone was still waiting. The room became completely silent as I placed the folder on the dining table. Without showing any anger, I opened it and carefully laid out the original property deed, the mortgage documents, years of tax records, and every payment receipt I had personally made since my husband's passing. Each paper told the same story. Every bill had been paid from my account, and every legal responsibility had been mine alone. Grant stepped forward with complete confidence. He reached for the deed as if he expected to see both my name and Nora's listed as owners. His expression changed the moment he started reading. He turned each page more slowly than the last, searching for something that simply wasn't there. Every legal document listed only one name: Brenna Hale. No joint ownership. No future transfer agreement. No hidden paperwork giving anyone else rights to the property. I had remained the sole legal owner from the beginning. I looked at Nora as the realization spread across her face. The confidence she had shown only minutes earlier disappeared, replaced by disbelief. Grant stood speechless with the papers still in his hands. The relatives who had watched everything unfold stopped whispering. Even the movers remained still near the doorway. For the first time that day, no one had a single word to say. Grant refused to accept what he had just seen. He flipped through the documents again, convinced there had to be another agreement hidden somewhere. He insisted there must be paperwork showing the house would eventually belong to Nora or that ownership had already been transferred. His voice grew more frustrated with every page he checked, but the truth never changed. I calmly explained exactly what happened after my husband passed away. I had refinanced the house in my name alone because I wanted to make sure my daughter would always have a secure place to live. I worked extra shifts, sacrificed my own needs, and personally made every mortgage payment, tax payment, and insurance payment for more than 2 decades. No one else had ever contributed financially to the property. Everything they were standing in existed because of years of my hard work. Then I looked toward the contractors waiting with their equipment. I politely told them that no renovations had been approved because I was the only person with the legal authority to authorize changes to the house. After hearing that, they quietly gathered their tools, loaded the unopened furniture back onto the truck, and left without another question. The atmosphere inside the house changed instantly. Just minutes earlier, everyone had acted as though Grant and Nora were already in control. Now no one wanted to speak. Relatives who had laughed at Grant's joke suddenly avoided looking at me. Some stared at the floor while others quietly stepped back, realizing they had made assumptions without knowing the facts. Grant's confidence disappeared completely, and Nora stood beside him in stunned silence. The certainty that had filled the room only moments before was replaced by embarrassment, confusion, and the undeniable reality that their entire plan had begun falling apart. As everyone struggled to process what had happened, more uncomfortable truths began coming to light. One of Grant's relatives quietly admitted they had always believed he already owned the house. Another guest looked confused and asked why the ownership documents showed only my name when Grant had spent months telling people the property belonged to him. That single question opened the door to a conversation no one expected. Piece by piece, the truth came out. Grant had been presenting the house as one of his personal assets while speaking with friends and potential business partners. He wanted to launch a risky real estate investment project and had used my home as proof that he had enough financial stability to gain trust. He never actually owned the property, but he spoke confidently enough that no one questioned him. Without legal ownership, everything changed. The investment proposal immediately lost credibility because one of its biggest claimed assets didn't belong to him. Several people who had expressed interest in working with him began backing away after learning the truth. I turned toward Nora, hoping she would tell me she knew nothing about it. Instead, she lowered her eyes and quietly admitted she had been aware of Grant's plans. She said she honestly believed I would eventually transfer the house to them after the wedding, so she never thought it would become a problem. Hearing those words hurt more than anything Grant had done. In that moment, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding created overnight. They hadn't simply assumed too much or gotten carried away with wedding excitement. They had built their future around a decision they expected me to make without ever asking my permission. Their betrayal hadn't started that morning. It had been carefully planned for months while I trusted them completely. For a long time, I believed that being a good mother meant putting my daughter before myself no matter the cost. I had spent years making sacrifices without expecting anything in return. I overlooked disrespect, ignored hurtful comments, and convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. Even after everything that had happened that morning, a small part of me still hoped Nora would apologize and tell me she had made a terrible mistake. Instead, she continued defending Grant. She insisted they were only trying to build a future together and accused me of making everything harder than it needed to be. Not once did she acknowledge how deeply they had betrayed my trust. Hearing her justify their actions changed something inside me. I finally understood that love should never require giving up my dignity or allowing people to take advantage of my kindness. I looked at both of them and spoke as calmly as I could. I told Nora and Grant that they needed to leave my property immediately. There was no anger in my voice, only certainty. The conversation was over, and my decision was final. The room quickly filled with different reactions. A few relatives accused me of ruining the wedding and tearing the family apart. They said I should forgive them because they were young and excited about starting their lives together. Others remained quiet for a moment before admitting I had every legal and moral right to protect the home I had worked so hard to keep. Some even apologized for assuming the house belonged to someone else. As I watched Nora and Grant gather their things, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The guilt that had controlled so many of my decisions finally disappeared. For the first time, I chose to protect myself instead of sacrificing everything to keep everyone else comfortable. The consequences of that day arrived much sooner than anyone expected. Within a few days, word spread among Grant's business contacts that he had exaggerated his financial position. The investment partners who had shown interest in his project quickly pulled out after learning that the house he claimed as an asset was never his to begin with. Without that credibility, his entire proposal fell apart before it ever had the chance to move forward. The problems didn't stop there. Wedding vendors who had been counting on large payments suddenly requested updated financial information and revised payment schedules. Some services were placed on hold until deposits could be confirmed. Plans that had once seemed certain became filled with delays and uncertainty. Nora finally realized how much of their future had been built on assumptions instead of facts. People who had once admired the couple's confidence slowly stepped away. Invitations became less frequent, phone calls stopped, and many who had eagerly supported Grant no longer wanted to be associated with the situation. It became clear that some relationships had depended more on appearances than genuine respect. While they struggled to deal with the consequences of their own choices, I focused on rebuilding my peace. I hired a locksmith and changed every lock on the house so I could finally feel secure again. I met with my attorney to review my estate documents and made sure every legal record reflected my wishes clearly. For the first time in years, I knew there would be no confusion about my home or my future. As the house grew quiet again, I realized something important. Peace wasn't something someone else could give me. It came from protecting the life I had worked so hard to build and refusing to let anyone take it away. Several weeks passed without hearing a single word from Nora. The silence gave me time to reflect and begin healing from everything that had happened. Then one quiet afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened the front door, Nora was standing there alone. Grant was nowhere in sight. She looked exhausted, as though the past few weeks had been far more difficult than she had expected. After a long moment of silence, she quietly asked if we could talk. I stepped aside and invited her in, but neither of us spoke until we were seated in the living room. Finally, she admitted that her relationship with Grant had fallen apart. Once his business plans collapsed, their conversations turned into endless arguments filled with blame and resentment. The future they had imagined together disappeared almost as quickly as it had been built. With tears in her eyes, Nora looked at me and confessed something I had been waiting to hear. She said she had allowed ambition and the promise of a comfortable future to replace the gratitude she should have felt toward the person who had sacrificed everything for her. She admitted that the words she had shouted that morning, "You don't belong here anymore," had replayed in her mind every day since. The more she thought about them, the more ashamed she became. I listened without interrupting. Her apology sounded sincere, and I could see genuine regret in her face. Still, I also understood that trust doesn't return simply because someone says they're sorry. The pain of betrayal leaves scars that cannot disappear overnight. Before she left, I told Nora I appreciated her honesty, but rebuilding our relationship would take time, patience, and consistent actions. Some wounds are too deep to heal with words alone, no matter how heartfelt those words may be. After our conversation, I didn't pretend everything was suddenly normal again. I cared about Nora, but I also knew that forgiveness without accountability would only repeat the same mistakes. I told her that if we were going to rebuild our relationship, it would have to happen slowly. trust had been broken over many months, and it would take time to restore. She accepted my decision without arguing, which was the first sign that she truly wanted to change. Over the following weeks, Nora began visiting regularly. She never assumed she was welcome without asking first, and she respected every boundary I set. Instead of making promises about the future, she focused on her actions. She helped with small repairs around the house, cooked dinner with me, and offered to assist with errands whenever I needed it. She wasn't trying to impress me. She was trying to show that she understood what respect looked like. As we spent more time together, our conversations became more honest than they had been in years. For the first time, I told her how lonely I had felt after losing her father. I shared the fear of raising a child alone and the sacrifices I made to keep a roof over our heads. I admitted how deeply her betrayal had hurt because it made me feel as though those years of love and hard work had been forgotten. Nora listened quietly without making excuses. She finally understood that the home she had taken for granted represented decades of sacrifice, not just bricks and walls. She apologized again, but this time her actions gave those words meaning. Our relationship wasn't magically repaired, but each honest conversation became another step toward healing, and that progress felt real. Several months passed, and little by little, my house began to feel like home again. I took my time restoring each room, not because anyone expected me to, but because I wanted the space to reflect the life I had built over the years. The unnecessary renovation plans were cancelled, and I brought back the family photographs that had once been packed away. Pictures of birthdays, holiday gatherings, and memories with my late husband returned to the walls where they belonged. Every corner reminded me that this home had been built with love, sacrifice, and resilience, not for appearances or status. The quiet that once felt lonely slowly became comforting. I no longer worried about someone making decisions behind my back or treating me like I didn't belong. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace in my own home. Nora also began building a different future for herself. Instead of depending on people who valued money and image above honesty, she found a steady job, rented a small apartment, and learned to stand on her own. She started making choices based on integrity rather than someone else's expectations. Watching her become independent gave me hope that she had truly learned from everything we had been through. Our relationship remained careful, but it was built on mutual respect instead of assumptions. We spoke honestly, visited each other often, and never ignored difficult conversations. There were still painful memories, but they no longer controlled our lives. Looking back, I realized that protecting myself had never been an act of selfishness. Setting boundaries had preserved my dignity and allowed our relationship to heal naturally. Sometimes the strongest way to love someone is to refuse to let them take your kindness for granted. Looking back now, I understand that betrayal rarely begins with one cruel sentence or one dramatic moment. It grows quietly through small acts of disrespect that are ignored because you love the people responsible. It starts when your opinions are dismissed, your sacrifices are taken for granted, and you're expected to remain silent just to keep everyone else happy. By the time my daughter looked at me and said I didn't belong in my own home, the damage had already been building for months. Those words were simply the final chapter of a much longer story. Many people have asked whether I wanted revenge. The truth is, I never did. I didn't need to embarrass anyone or seek payback. The truth spoke for itself. One legal document, kept safely in an old blue folder for years, carried more power than any argument I could have made. Facts have a way of exposing lies without raising their voices. This experience taught me that kindness should never require sacrificing your dignity. Loving your family doesn't mean accepting disrespect or allowing people to erase everything you've worked to build. Healthy relationships are built on gratitude, honesty, and mutual respect, not entitlement. Today, my relationship with Nora is stronger because it is based on truth instead of assumptions. We both learned difficult lessons, but those lessons changed us for the better. She discovered the value of accountability, and I discovered the importance of protecting my own peace. If there's one thing I hope anyone listening takes away from my story, it's this: never let someone convince you that standing up for yourself is selfish. Sometimes the strongest response isn't anger or revenge. It's quietly standing your ground, knowing your worth, and refusing to let anyone rewrite the truth of your life.